Hello, everyone. This is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today, I am on with a scholar. We're going to be talking about the Psalms and the earliest texts that seem to mention Yahweh. And we're kind of peeling back the layers, things that you might have missed, and ways that we can use historical analysis to look at how the ancient Israelites, the earliest ancient Israelites, might have viewed Yahweh. How are you doing today?
Yeah, thank you, Zach, for having me on your channel. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. I appreciate it. So you wrote an article about this topic that people can check out in the description, The Origins of Yahweh in Light of the Earliest Psalms. And it would be a really, really interesting topic. So could you just give my audience just a brief overview of your main arguments from this paper? What was the big discoveries?
Yeah, there is a huge discussion in Hebrew Bible, Old Testament scholarship about the earliest veneration of Yahweh. So where did the deity Yahweh come from? So in which region was he originally venerated? So how was his cult conceived? Can we say something about the earliest texts in the Bible which mirror his religious historical position within the wider ancient Near Eastern context? So that's the large discussion in Hebrew Bible / Old Testament scholarship, which goes on for many decades already. And in this context, the Psalms play a decisive role. And my thesis in this article is that the book of Psalms and this collection of 150 canonical Psalms, as we have them in the Bible, contain fragments of rather early or ancient Hebrew poetry, which contains crucial traces, remnants of hymns and prayers, which mirror how the deity Yahweh was venerated, was imagined in the earliest period of Hebrew religion and culture. And that's the idea. And so I'm rather confident that we find certain arguments, we can name certain arguments how to reconstruct these early pieces of ancient Hebrew poetry within the book of Psalms, slightly also in other books of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, but only very rarely, though. So the most of the earliest material is included in the Psalms. And in my article, I try to give a number of selected passages which are, in my view, very crucial, very remarkable or foundational witnesses of this early veneration of Yahweh.
Much appreciated. So, there's for the average reader, they might have a really difficult time being able to date the Psalms. This is a really, really complicated idea to be able to do such a thing. Our actual manuscripts are very late. The earliest ones were the Dead Sea Scrolls or Septuagint. So, I mean, really, I myself, if you're asking me to do it, I wouldn't be able to do it. Definitely not.
Yeah.
Do you think, or do scholars in general have any idea when the earliest Psalms date to? And do you have any? I mean, could you just give us an idea of how they would do that? How would they even date it to begin with?
Yeah, it's as you say, it's certainly a quite complicated question, since all this is and remains to a certain extent also speculative, because you can say, okay, we, as you just mentioned, okay, we have manuscripts only from the maybe 3rd and 2nd century BCE. These are the oldest witnesses of the Psalms, both from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint. And anything else we can establish about when these texts originated is based on additional arguments of a rather a complicated nature. But there are also some quite clear cut and I would say also compelling ways of establish this dating. A main point is the comparison of the Psalms with other ancient Near Eastern literature. So other hymns and prayers from the neighboring ancient Near Eastern cultures. And here is one culture which is at the core of the discussion, and which is very, very important for understanding, I would say, the entire Old Testament. These are the poetic texts from ancient Ugarit, so this late Bronze Age kingdom of northern Syria, where a certain number of epic, poetic texts was discovered. Texts which are in part very, very similar to these earliest texts in the Psalms. Okay, this is one area or one perspective which helps scholars to establish this dating of certain psalms as rather early or very early compositions of ancient Hebrew poetry. But I would also say, to a certain extent, you can also discern that if you read the texts as a, I would say, not educated reader of the Bible, for example, if you start out with Psalm 1, which speaks about the Torah and the pious one who is reading the Torah day and night, and who is discerning himself from the so-called wicked, who are doomed to fall. You have a certain theology, okay. We say nowadays that this theology is probably rather late, so originated only in the Hellenistic age. And then if you proceed in reading and come across Psalm 29, you will immediately realize that this psalm has a completely different imagery, completely different language. It speaks about cosmic events. So a main topic of this psalm is the voice of Yahweh, in Hebrew, Qol Yahweh. This phrase, the voice of Yahweh, Qol Yahweh, is repeated 7 times. And it is repeated in a certain very impressive fashion, which is somewhat evocative of a thunderstorm. And also the imagery which is contained here is or seems related to images of a thunderstorm. So and if you come, so let's say you started reading the Psalter with Psalm 1, and then you come to Psalm 29, you will somehow see, okay, or feel that this is kind of different world, because here's no mention of the righteous ones, or no mention of the Torah, no mention of the divine law, of the history of salvation. All this is lacking, and something else is unfolded in a very impressive way.
That's really interesting. So basically what you're saying is there are certain ideas that we see throughout history, and just like today, certain people might believe in a certain view of science, say in the last 50 years, and that doesn't start until, say 50 years ago, but then there was another view of science that started another 50 years ago. So, 100 years ago. So we can use, if we just look at some random Facebook post about that view, we can maybe say, hey, this couldn't be any later than this, because that view just didn't exist at that time period. It's really, really interesting. And for this example, so you basically, it seems like you're saying that, hey, we get this voice of Yahweh and this theme of, thunder and I guess be really loud because of God, Yahweh's voice. And that compares with the Ugaritic text you see on the right that says his holy voice made the earth tremble, the saying of his lips, the mountains. So similarly, with the Psalm 1, you talk about these other themes that we don't really see in other ancient Near Eastern cultures until the Hellenistic period. So we can date it. Hey, that probably doesn't date until the Hellenistic period, because we don't really see it ever existing. And it's possible, right? It's possible that it could have existed. We just don't have any texts. But you're asking what's the most probable thing? Is that right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, certainly you can always say all these reconstructions are to a certain extent circular, and you cannot avoid that, actually. But this is the fact in all historical reconstruction, I would say. And I mean, here we are, on the one hand, we are lacking enough primary sources, let's say from the kingdom of Israel, or the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah in the 10th, 9th, 8th century BCE. We have some primary sources but very little sources and texts, not that many, and therefore it is difficult to establish these things with a broad fundament of sources. But on the other hand, we have these similarities to the late Bronze Age poetry from Ugarit, particularly, and also to other hymnic texts from ancient Mesopotamia, which also come from cults of so-called storm gods. And also there we have some really striking parallels with these, I would say, early Psalms, parallels which even are in some cases almost verbatim parallel. So for example, here, as you showed, this text from Ugarit, Baal's voice makes the earth tremble. And a very similar imagery we have with the voice of Yahweh. The voice of Yahweh, it is said, causes the wilderness to go into labor. Okay, to go into labor is a certain metaphoric expression, which seems to allude to the trembling of the earth. And it is somewhat striking that there is another text, an Mesopotamian hymn to the storm god, North Mesopotamian storm god Adat, of whom it is also said that he makes the wilderness to go into labor. So it's exactly the same motif, it's the same metaphor, although this Adat hymn comes from, let's say, 1,000 kilometers distance northeast of, let's say, Samaria, ancient Samaria, or the kingdom of Israel. And therefore, things like that help establish these fragments of early poetry within the Psalms.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. Okay. And so for my audience, there's the other question of, like, we can have a very ancient text, but then, in this time period, scribes and people that had these texts didn't seem to have any problem with editing it a little bit or making their own creation out of things. So how would you, in your opinion, how would you find out whether a text is an ancient text compared to, excuse me, an ancient text compared to a text that I guess was ancient, but also had edits or things that were added to it? Does that make sense?
First of all, we can assume that in most of the Psalms, we have certain traces of later editorial activity.
Okay.
So this is also true for this sample of Psalm 29.
Okay.
Where you find in the biblical versions, or in the version as we have it now in the Bible, for example, we find a title which assigns the psalm to David, as it is found in many other psalms. And scholarship has established since the 19th century that these superscriptions are in all likelihood late additions to the text. So it's not really linked with the text as such, but it's simply added in front of it. And if you then compare the version in the Septuagint, for example, you find there an even more extensive title of the psalm, which connects the psalm with the festival of booths. So that is one of the three main festivals of the Hebrew Bible, and this is not found in the Hebrew version, and it's a clear, I would say, proof or documentation of this scribal activity, that, okay, the scribes were here and there adding some details. They were also in part struggling with the meaning of certain words and phrases, and they added tiny glosses for improving the text. And also they added sometimes elements which a kind of theologically update the earlier texts. So, for example, in Psalm 29, there is a line in the end which connects this storm god imagery with the blessing that Yahweh gives to his own people. And this imagery is there rather surprising, and it does not really fit into the other imagery of the psalm. And there are good arguments that this is such a scribal improvement of a much older text, which updated the text according to the needs of a changed time.
That's really, really fascinating. So basically what you're saying is we have a text and it's got a certain theme to it, it's got a certain logic to it, it makes sense. And then all of a sudden we have a random line that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't match the theme of it. It's like, well, it's possible that some ancient writer was writing and just randomly added a line that didn't make any sense. It's possible, but that seems really unlikely unless if they're just putting just random lines together. Clearly they're not. So it was most likely added later.
Yeah. And as I said, we have documented evidence for such editorial improvements. So documented evidence means if we compare the Hebrew version of the biblical text, so the so-called Masoretic version, on the one hand with the Septuagint, and on the other hand with those scrolls from Qumran that attest the text of the Psalms. There are some really clear cases where you can really observe, if you compare these, if you put these two texts or three texts side by side, you see, okay, here in this version, someone has changed it a little bit or added some detail. It's really documented. Okay, I have to also be clear that it is not documented in many cases. So, for example, what I postulate about Psalm 29, we have this documentation with the title, but not with the final line. Okay, this is my hypothesis, and not only my hypothesis, but also of many other scholars. But you can say, okay, if in the title it is documented that even later on someone added this and connected the psalm with the festival of booths, then why should we exclude that also in an earlier stage the text was also improved in a similar way? And then content-wise, there are good arguments for that, and also arguments that are based on the poetic structure of the texts.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Okay, and how does the early depiction of Yahweh in Zion resemble the storm god Baal of Zevon?
Yeah, this is a question which is particularly related to Psalm 48.
Okay.
Rather complicated so-called Zion psalm, which is really challenging to reconstruct. So already the poetic structure of this text is rather complicated. And therefore, it's also quite debated how this psalm has to be reconstructed and explained in a literary historical perspective. But we have one really striking element there, which is in fact connected with the name Zion. So the psalm speaks about Mount Zion, so the holy mountain. As we know, this place name from many other texts of the Hebrew Bible, connected with David. So David was the one who conquered Mount Zion and settled there as a king. And later on, the temple was built there, and so on and so on. And here in Psalm 48, the text speaks about Mount Zion and calls it peak of the northern mountain. And this phrase, peak of the northern mountain, is in Hebrew connected with the place name Tzafon. So what I translated here in English with northern mountain is in Hebrew the word Tzafon. And Tzafon is actually a very particular mountain north of Ugarit, the so-called Jebel el-Aqra. So that's the modern Arabic place name. A rather high mountain, very close to the Mediterranean coast. So about over 1,700 meters above sea. So a rather high elevation, just close to the Mediterranean coastline. And this mountain, the Tzafon, was in Ugarit thought to be the seat of the storm god Baal Tzafon. So one of the manifestations of the Syrian storm god, manifestation that was venerated in this late Bronze Age city of Ugarit. And the striking thing here in Psalm 48 now is that the psalm somehow equates or identifies Mount Zion, so which is a tiny, tiny little hill somewhere in Jerusalem, with this rather massive mountain far north of Jerusalem, namely north of Ugarit. And between both mountains, there is a distance of several hundreds of kilometers. But the text of Psalm 48, nevertheless, identifies both with each other. And this is really a strange and striking thing, which implies that Mount Zion is here imagined in a similar fashion as the seat of the storm god of Ugarit. And this means that Yahweh is depicted here as the let's say Jerusalemite version of a storm god, enthroned on this Mount Tzafon, and the Mount Tzafon is identified with Mount Zion, or Mount Zion is identified with the Tzafon. And this shows, I would say, that this holy mountain here is not a realistic description of how the geography in Jerusalem is. If you know where Mount Zion is, that is really a very tiny hill, nothing spectacular in any way. But the text here doesn't care of the real circumstances. The text imagines Mount Zion as this glorious high peak, I would say kind of peak of the entire world, or the entire cosmos. And I think this is a very crucial and foundational text of this rather early stage of the veneration of Yahweh.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, it seems like whoever wrote this, they didn't know the geography, which would be odd if they're in Israel. Of course, they would know the geography, right?
Right.
So that doesn't make much sense. So, I'm no scholar, but it seems like you would have to say that an ancient Israelite took a common phrase or text of or description of Zavon, of where Baal lives or whatever,
Yeah.
and basically reuse that text and put Yahweh in it. Is that how you understand it?
Yeah, that is a possibility. I mean, it's I would be somewhat cautious to explain precisely how this
Yeah.
originated, but somehow I would say does this psalm merge the motif of Mount Zion with this mythic Mount Zaphon, which maybe the author in fact didn't know. I would say, as you just mentioned, the author certainly is familiar with Jerusalem and is familiar with the geography there. But the point is that the text imagines this Mount Zion as something which goes beyond the realistic dimensions, the real dimensions. And this is rather typical for these ancient texts. We find similar logic also in many ancient Near Eastern hymns and prayers and epics. So the logic is that there is a certain visible reality, but the true reality is not the reality that is visible and describable in geographical terms. The true reality is what is hidden behind the visible reality. So, and this is the main thing. So Mount Zion is in truth, it is much larger mountain. It's the peak of the cosmos, and there is Yahweh enthroned in all his glory and reigning the cosmos as a divine king. And this is a very similar imagery with the imagery we find in ancient Ugarit.
That's very fascinating. Did you have any other things that you wanted to talk about as far as Yahweh and Zion and just how it was viewed with that location?
Yeah, I mean, the so-called Zion theology, as we find it in the Bible, is revolving especially around the idea of divine presence in Zion or on Zion, on Mount Zion, however you call it. This theology is particularly developed in the book of Isaiah. There it is historically, I think, connected with a certain sequence of very dramatic events in the late 8th century. So the king Hezekiah, who was a vassal of the Neo-Assyrian emperors, decided to rebel against Assyrian rule in the year 705 BCE, and he started a rebellion. He built a coalition against the Assyrians, and the prophet Isaiah seems to have strongly warned against this decision, because there was the danger that the Assyrians would conquer the rebellious king and destroy the rebellious kingdom. And this almost happened, but for some historical reason, Jerusalem was not conquered. So there was a military action by the Assyrian king Sennacherib, who marched against the rebellious king Hezekiah and his coalition partners, and they destroyed many parts of the kingdom of Judah, but Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, was left intact, which may have had simply pragmatic reasons. King Hezekiah paid a heavy tribute to get rid of the Assyrian attack, so meaning he bowed down to the Assyrian force, and he submitted to the Assyrian yoke again, and paid a huge tribute to King Sennacherib, and the king left Jerusalem intact. And this was later on the starting point for a huge glorification of Jerusalem, or Mount Zion, and the temple in Jerusalem, revolving around the idea of divine presence. It was asked, so how could it be that Jerusalem was saved in this crisis? Because people started to say Yahweh is residing there. And texts like Psalm 48 became a wonderful starting point for this idea that, here it is said, Yahweh is in her citadels. He has shown himself as a fortress. So Yahweh has proven himself to be a kind of fortress for the people who live there in this city. And this idea was later on, partly in the book of Isaiah and partly also in other Psalms, developed into a rather coherent theology, so the so-called Zion theology, which stresses that because of Yahweh's presence on Zion, the city is protected. And this is an ambivalent idea, because 130 years later, the kings of Jerusalem tried again to rebel against the Neo-Babylonians, obviously trusting very much in the divine help, and maybe the idea was that Yahweh has once rescued Jerusalem from such a huge threat. Let's try it again. And this failed. And Jerusalem was finally conquered, and the temple was destroyed in 586. And maybe this is also due to certain tendencies in the Zion theology. But later on, this was also kind of taken up as a fruitful theological idea. So in the Hebrew Bible, we have this connection with the large field of ethics. And then people started to ask, why the city of Jerusalem or Mount Zion was destroyed in spite of Yahweh's presence. So that's not because of Yahweh's weakness, but it is because the people there misbehaved in some way. So they transgressed certain ethical rules, violence spread in the city, whatever. Ideas like that justified that Yahweh himself finally destroyed his city, or at least permitted that the Neo-Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem.
Much appreciated. All right. And did you have anything else you wanted to add about Psalm 48? It's described as the peak of the world. How does that reflect broader ancient and Near Eastern cosmology?
Yeah, I think it's in a way typical for the idea of the center of the world. So you have in many ancient Near Eastern texts and also images a basic distinction between the center of the world and the periphery. So you have a certain city as a center, you have a temple as a center, you also have the idea of a mountain peak as the center of the world. And this is also connected with the idea that the center is the sphere of order that is established by the deity, order and defended by the deity. And this is surrounded by the periphery, which is ruled by forces of chaos. And if, for example, a younger witness of this theology is Psalm 46, which is close to Psalm 48, so two Psalms earlier, and both Psalms are clearly related. And Psalm 46 unfolds very impressively this idea, okay, the periphery of the world is in total chaos. So the waters are boiling and shaking the earth. They are shaking the mountains. And with the waters are also enemy forces pillaging and shattering the cosmos. And but in the center of the cosmos, there is the divine city, so the God's own city, which is like in the eye of a hurricane. So it is safe, it is quiet, it is protected because of Yahweh's presence. And this is a very typical development of this basic idea, as I said, that we find in Psalm 48 and also in other ancient Near Eastern texts.
Very fascinating. So I had a question from someone that actually contacted you originally, but they were wanting to know: are you aware of Michael Heiser's work on this topic of I guess the connection between Baal and Yahweh in the Psalms and the storm god motif? Are you familiar with him at all?
Yeah, I think at least a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. A lot there. My guy's got a lot of big fans. So
yeah.
People are
I
curious.
mean,
Curious
these
about that.
connections between the text from Ugarit and the Psalms have been discussed and reconstructed since the discovery of the Ugaritic texts in the early 1930s. And very early on, some scholars, including those who were really working on the Ugaritic texts, made these comparisons between the Ugaritic epic and certain parts of the Psalms. And this research is, in my perspective, very fruitful. It somehow broke off later on for very complex reasons, or it was done not that properly anymore. And I think one should resume this kind of research because still there are many details and many connections which need to be highlighted and established.
Much appreciated. All right. So in Psalm 21, it describes the king rejoicing in Yahweh's victorious deed.
Mhm.
What does this phrase suggest about the divine-human relationship in early Israelite kingship theology?
The Psalm 21 is first of all a very crucial text highlighting the role of the king within this early theology. The victorious deed of Yahweh, the king rejoices about, is in this text not explained, but one can, I would say, reconstruct with some confidence what it is. If one connects this with the imagery of Psalm 18, for example, there we have a certain theophany where the storm god appears as a battle warrior, very vivid imagery, and one can connect this victorious deed by Yahweh with Yahweh's battle against his enemy and his enemies, and particularly against chaotic forces of the cosmos. And the fact that, according to Psalm 21, the king rejoices about Yahweh's victory, let's say, implies that there is a rather close relationship between the king and Yahweh, or Yahweh and the king. You can also have it in the next. You also find it in the next line, in the next verse. You have given him his heart's desire, and the request of his lips you have not withheld. So, meaning the king has asked something from Yahweh, and Yahweh has granted him his request. And this is further explained in the next lines. For you to meet him with blessings of good, you set on his head a diadem of gold. So this means that Yahweh has put a diadem, a kind of crown, on the king's head, thereby entrusting him with the dominion and the rulership. And the next line is even more striking. Life he has asked from you, you gave it to him, length of days forever and ever. This verse is very, very close on the one hand to Phoenician inscriptions of kings, in which very similar words and phrases occur that stress the eternal rule of these kings. And one gets the impression the king is imagined not as a single individual, but he is imagined as a person who is whose rule is everlasting. So this single individual of the king is somehow connected with the idea of his dynasty. That is the idea, I think, in this line. And on the other hand, there's another striking parallel in one of the Ugaritic epics, the epic of Akkad, where we have a very particular scene, dialogue or discussion, this debate between the hero Akkad and the goddess Anat. And in this scene, a very similar phrase is included with which overlaps almost verbatim with this passage here in Psalm 21. So the king is here imagined as a very close relation of Yahweh. So he is the vassal of the deity. Yahweh has given him the dominion. He has given him the kingship, and now the king is kind of his human vessel. He represents Yahweh's heavenly role through his human royal authority. That is the basic idea, and I think the concept of Yahweh's victorious deed is a crucial item or crucial motif in this complex theology.
Thank you. All right, you briefly talked about this, but could you explain how the earthly warfare is seen as a reflection of divine cosmic battle? How does that make any sense?
This is an idea, I think, that which you can find in all ancient Near Eastern cultures, including ancient Israel. Is that okay? When kings go into battle, they fight against their enemies, but they fight not only by themselves against their enemies, but with the help and the support by their deities, by their gods. And this is symbolized, for example, by through symbols, kind of standards, flags, things like that, which are brought into battle by the kings and their warriors and so on. And going into battle is always connected with certain rituals, particularly before the battle. Oracles have to be consulted, checking whether the gods approve the king's actions, and sacrifices are offered before the battle. Prophets speak to the king a certain so-called oracle of salvation. So, fear not, king, I will be with you, I will accompany you into battle. And all these many items, motifs, images hint at a larger concept, so that the king is not only going by himself into battle, but he is accompanied by the gods who are doing the real fight. And there you have the same logic of two levels or two dimensions of reality as we have seen in Psalm 48. So you have the visible reality, and you have an invisible background. And the invisible background, what happens there is what matters. So the gods are not visible, but they are fighting with the king in the background. And then you can ask, okay, what happens in the divine world actually? And if you then go to mythological texts, so epics about the gods, you find very often scenes of divine battles. So, for example, in Mesopotamia, we have the very central epic Enuma Elish about the kingship of the god Marduk of Babylon. And the central scene of this epic is Marduk's battle against a chaotic, demonic, dragon-like entity called Tiamat, so the kind of deified sea. And Marduk is fighting against this monster and is victorious. And this battle of the divine king against a chaotic power, this is very similar to what happened on earth in the battles of the human kings. And if you then go on and read inscriptions, for example, of the Assyrian kings, they often compare their own battles with the divine battles against these chaotic powers. And then you more and more realize that it's not only a comparison, so that the king says, okay, what I am doing here is similar as what happens in the divine world, but it is the one and the same action. So when the king on earth marches against his enemies, simultaneously the divine king fights against his divine enemies. So this is one and the same process. And there is also a huge theology in the background of that, which connects these two levels of reality.
That's really, really fascinating. So my next question for you was, how do ancient Near Eastern war god depictions like Month or the Neo-Assyrian storm god visually support or influence this theology?
I would say these depictions, so pictorial representations of war gods. In this case here, we have the war god Mont from Egypt, who is supporting the pharaoh when he shoots the bow against his enemies. This is really a nice and somewhat also exceptional image, which is has a similar idea as this passage here from Psalm 18, where it reads, "He teaches," the king says, "He teaches," so God, or Yahweh probably, "He teaches my hands for war and my arms bend the bow." It is not exactly the same, but it is very similar. So I would say that these pictorial depictions are not, as you said, influencing this theology. I would say they mirror this theology. They are simply also attestations of this larger theology, which is in the background of both the texts and the images. And you have it's a kind of a mosaic what we find in the ancient Near Eastern literature and pictorial art. So we have various and manifold single motifs and depictions, and we have texts, poetic texts, which use metaphors, several motifs, and all these single motifs form a kind of mosaic, or you could also speak of a network, which all in all mirrors a larger theology which is presupposed in the background.
That's very fascinating. Very fascinating. Okay. And what does it mean for Yahweh to be portrayed as rescuing someone from the great waters, death and Sheol? What would that mean for Yahweh to rescue someone from that?
Yeah, I mean, this is also a fascinating aspect of this entire theology, because there in Psalm 18 you have these passages which suggest that there is an individual person, one single person, who somehow got overpowered by chaotic forces, by dark, demonic, cosmic forces, which are not entirely personified, but which are somehow very vivid, very lively forces. They have overpowered this individual. They try to swallow him, and certainly they want to drown him. And a crucial motif, which is occurring here in this passage, is the motif of the great waters. In Hebrew, this is the term Mayim Rabim, which is time and again occurring in these pieces of early Hebrew poetry. We had it already in Psalm 29, where the oldest part of the psalm starts out with the line, "The voice of Yahweh over the great waters," is over the great waters. Okay, there is some kind of imagination behind that. It's not entirely clear how it is imagined, but this seems to be a cosmic body of waters, which here in this case tries to swallow and to drown this praying individual. So, and of course, if you imagine this scenery, it's kind of like if you are walking on the beach, and all of a sudden tsunami comes out from the sea over and is swallowing the whole entire beach, and you as a single individual, you are drawn into the waters and have no chance to survive this. That's the imagery. And now what is the only way of being rescued? This is the He. The psalm speaks about. Obviously, this is Yahweh here. He reaches on from high. He takes me, he draws me out of great water. So Yahweh is somehow, his attention is somehow drawn to this scene, and he comes to the rescue of this individual. So he reaches out and draws this individual from these overpowering, monstrous waves of the great waters. And by this, this person is saved. And this shows that the cosmic level and the individual level are closely connected here in this text. So on the one hand, we have a cosmic scene. Okay, the dimensions. Imagine, as I said, imagine a tsunami, a huge tsunami, swallowing huge landscapes and so on. And then we have a single human being who is endangered by this cosmic scene, and the text makes this the central topic.
Yeah, that's really crazy. So in verse 20 at the bottom right there, it says the words wide place. So, and he brought me out into the wide place. He delivers to me because he took pleasure in me. What would you say that symbolizes? How should we understand that, and how does that reflect what you've been talking about?
Yeah, the wide place is here somehow the symbol of the final rescue. So once Yahweh has brought out this endangered individual to the wide place, maybe it's imagined as a large plain or a large valley, then it seems he is safe and the crisis is over. The attack, being attacked of these brutal, destroying cosmic waters, all this has passed away, and now the individual is safe and is within this wide place. It is not precisely said how we have to imagine this wide place. Maybe there's one idea that helps to understand it a little bit more precisely. In the laments of distress, which we find also in the book of Psalms in several places, and many of them go back also to rather early prayers, I would say. There, the situation of being in danger, being in distress, is often connected with the word or adjective of narrow, narrowness. So I am in need, I am in a difficult situation, I am in danger. This is often connected with the term meaning I am somehow in a very narrow place. I'm restrained. And my entire person is forced into something which really affects me physically because of so these powers they try to squeeze me in a way even. And here the opposite then to this narrowness, to this reduced space where you can barely breathe and survive, and maybe it's impossible to survive this for a longer time. The opposite to that is the white space, where you stand kind of on a plane or something like that, and you overlook everything, and if any enemy comes closer, you would see him from quite afar. Therefore, you are always in the better position. And this is, I think, the logic of this image of the white place.
That's really, really fascinating. Thank you. So next thing I want to talk about, well, actually, I have 4 more questions for you, but I also want to be respectful of your time. Do you have more time? Do you want to keep going?
Okay. I have. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So Psalm 57, that connects personal suffering to cosmic danger. How does this suggest that every human struggle mirrors the endangered cosmos?
57, Psalm 57. Yeah. I think, okay, you can connect it on several levels. Maybe the most impressive imagery is connected with the heart of the praying individual. But maybe I should first a little bit explain the first three strophes or verses. So in the first line, the praying individual speaks, be gracious to me, Yahweh, be gracious to me, for in you I have taken refuge. In the shadow of your wings I seek refuge until this destroying forces pass by. It's a similar situation as we have seen it in Psalm 18. So some huge destroying forces are coming by, and it's almost impossible to withstand them, and the life of this person is really in danger. And then the text continues, I am in the midst of lions. So he's encircled by a group of lions, and then I must lie down among those who devour, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and whose tongue is a sharp sword. This is a very peculiar imagery, very dynamic. First, you have this scene of being encircled by a group of lions. Then all of a sudden, these lions are changing and morphing into a kind of an army with sharp spears and arrows and sharp swords. So suddenly, all of a sudden, this individual sees himself surrounded and encircled by this army. And then the imagery changes again. They set a net for my feet. My soul was bowed down. They dug before me a pit. And now a very surprising line comes. They fell into its midst. So the enemies are imagined as hunters, a group of hunters who are hunting some deer, and the praying individual is imagined as this deer who is tries to escape the net and the pit which was made by the hunters. But then all of a sudden the text continues that the hunters fell into their own pit. And this is obviously reminiscent of a known proverb. So those who are making a pit, they fall into it themselves. And then the text continues with very beautiful lines. My heart is fixed, Yahweh, my heart is fixed. I will sing and make melody. So here, the heart of this individual is, in spite of all this chaotic and dangerous beginning, is fixed, as he says. Being fixed means here it is divinely protected and established and made secure. The same, precisely the same term is in another very important psalm, Psalm 93, connected with the entire earth. So the entire earth and Yahweh's divine throne. Meaning we have three levels here which are in the background of this text. We have the entire earth, which is fixed by Yahweh's kingship. Then we have the divine throne, Yahweh's throne in the heavens, which is by himself established and kept safe and stable against all the chaotic powers. And then, according to this psalm, also the heart of this praying individual. This meaning, okay, this one person is kept secure by Yahweh, as Yahweh keeps the entire cosmos, keeps the world safe through his kingship. This is the somewhat complex logic which is found here, but which is rather similar, I would like to say, like this imagery in Psalm 18 with the cosmic waters, this large tsunami, and the one single individual who is endangered by that.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And so that's Psalm 57. How do later Psalms build on early storm theophany and divine kingship motifs? Do they reinterpret or preserve them, or do something else?
I would say both. Later Psalms both preserve the older imagery,
Okay.
and in part they also reinterpret it. This is a really striking thing. On the one hand, we have in our Bible Psalms that in all likelihood are rather old and go back to this early phase of Yahweh veneration, where Yahweh is clearly depicted as, I would say, an ancient Near Eastern storm god, like Baal of Ugarit, like Hadad Ramon of Damascus, or the famous Hadad of Aleppo, all rather famous cults of storm gods. And the Yahweh in the earliest Psalms we find in texts like Psalm 29 or Psalm 18 is very similar to these ancient Near Eastern storm gods in the neighboring cultures. And you were asking what happened later on. I mean, we have the striking fact that in our Bible, if we open our Bible and read Psalm 29, we are right in the middle of this ancient Near Eastern imagery. And this shows that later scribes and tradents retained and transmitted this ancient imagery almost unchanged. Okay, it's changed a little bit here and there, but it's basically it's retained. This is the one part of the answer. The other possibility, as you have mentioned, Zach, is the reinterpretation. And we have also clear instances for that. For example, we have within the 150 Psalms a kind of rewritten version of Psalm 29. This is Psalm 96. Psalm 96 is clearly dependent on Psalm 29. It reads in many passages very, very similar as Psalm 29, but it somehow changes certain motifs and ideas. So in Psalm 29, we have also traces of an original polytheistic imagery. So there are in the opening line the gods are mentioned. So the divine council, the sons of the gods, as it is called in Psalm 29, who are called to bow themselves and prostrate themselves to Yahweh as their divine king. And in Psalm 96, which is conceived along the lines of Psalm 29, the gods are replaced by the peoples of the world, the peoples of the earth. So there you see clearly, okay, that the authors of Psalm 96 tried to reinterpret this ancient imagery, this ancient polytheistic imagery, and they somehow said, okay, we don't want to talk about the gods anymore. We are now talking about the peoples, and we give it a somewhat different touch. This is an example for reinterpretation, which you find in several passages. I mean, one very influential reinterpretation of this storm god theophany is found in the Pentateuch, in the Torah, in the so-called Sinai pericope, right in the beginning in Exodus 19, where Yahweh appears on Mount Sinai. Within a theophany, like the ancient storm god of Psalm 29. But now it's on Mount Sinai, and it's part of the narration there. And the aim of this appearance of Yahweh with in the storm and so on is that he proclaims the 10 commandments from Mount Sinai directly to his people. And this is a clear kind of reinterpretation of the much older imagery of the storm god and his appearance and his theophany and so on. Yeah, so this is these are samples for these two tendencies in the younger texts.
So maybe you could help us there. So why do you think that the Sinai narrative of Yahweh giving Moses the 10 Commandments and the storm and all that, how is that a reinterpretation of earlier concepts?
I mean, because of the connection with the 10 Commandments as such, because the original texts about the divine king Yahweh, the divine warrior, the God in Psalm 29, whose voice makes the earth tremble, and so on, who is fighting against chaotic forces, who pulls the individual from swallowing waters. All this imagery is not in any way related to something like commandments, or the idea of that this God also demands certain ethical behavior from his congregation. This is not found in these texts, and it's okay. You can say there are some verses who may point in this direction, but they are not closely related with the main imagery, and therefore you can clearly see that in the Pentateuch, the theophany, the storm god imagery on Mount Sinai, okay, it's in 3 verses, mostly. 3 verses, okay, include this old imagery. But within the Pentateuch, these 3 verses are a very tiny part of text, which means it's a kind of a remnant, of earlier imagery, a remnant of this much older imagery of the storm god. But the focus now in the Sinai pericope is on completely different things and themes. It's about the election of the chosen people and what Yahweh's law is about, and so on. So this is a clear sample for huge development and a huge change.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I think you're right there. When we look at the Psalms, we don't see any idea of this like, big focus on laws and ethics in the same realm of these other passages like Psalm 29 are talking about the voice of Yahweh and his thunders and his waters and he's all over the great waters. Do we see anything like this focus on ethics at Ugarit and related to Baal and in the same environment?
No, this is kind of a remarkable thing, or I would say at least not at all. There are some tiny instances, okay, where you can also think of a certain basic ethic or ethical expectations which are found in these texts, but they are, first of all, very basic, very brief, and usually they are connected also with the concept of kingship, so human kingship. Okay, the human king, we have particularly not in Ugarit, but in Aleppo or in ancient Mari about the weather god of Aleppo, which is a similar divine figure as Yahweh and Baal, I would say. There we have an oracle where the weather god demands from the human king that he keeps certain ethical rules, which are you also find similarly in connection with other kings. So, for example, the famous Hammurabi in Babylon. Okay, there you find similar ideas, and here you can say, okay, a certain kind of ethic is already implied in these texts, but this is nothing at all which is comparable with what we find in the Pentateuch, in the Torah. These large teachings of Moses, where Moses teaches the people certain laws, certain ethics, and he time and again reminds them of their divine election and their obligations and so on. And all this is really outstanding and not found in this form in the ancient Near East and not in Ugarit as well.
That's crazy. That's something I hadn't thought about that before, but that makes a lot of sense. So if early Yahweh theology was deeply shaped by cosmic battle imagery and divine kingship, how should modern readers understand these psalms in light of their original context?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very important question. I mean, that's not that easy to answer. I would like to say or to share two ideas about this large topic and also challenge. You can say, okay, it's a challenge how we deal with these biblical texts in modern times. I mean, on the one hand, I would say that these ancient images, one can also call them myths, which the Old Testament, the Bible, shares with the ancient Near Eastern cultures. These ancient myths, so for example, the myth of the divine battle against chaotic powers, against chaotic forces. These myths and ideas remain compelling to a certain extent today, and because they are related to basic human experience. Okay, human beings, I would say, experience this conflict between order and chaos all the time. on many levels. Okay, even in modernity, we have chaotic powers at work in the political level, in the nature, on the cosmic level, forces which are uncontrollable or went out of control. Think of climate change or things like that. So forces which are somehow overpowering us. And these ancient myths, which are, of course, originated in a completely different situation with different technique and different state of human knowledge and so on. This is not comparable at all. But the basic experience, I would claim, is still comparable. The basic experience that human existence can be endangered by many powers which are not controllable, and therefore the basic idea of these myths is, and I would say both in the Old Testament and in the surrounding cultures, that human beings need at least one powerful God, or more than one powerful God, who helps them, so who rescues them from these chaotic powers. And this is one aspect I think which is still very valid. So if you read these ancient hymns in a modern situation, I would say this ancient dynamic, which is included in these texts, is still working and still very, very powerful. And it's of course dependent how you read the text, whether you read it without any historical knowledge, or whether you include it with historical knowledge. I would say one important aspect is here that the Bible shares basic ideas with the ancient Near Eastern cultures. So these ideas are not something singular. It's not completely something which is not found in other cultures as well. The Bible shares here basic ideas with other cultures, and this I would say is somewhat helpful against fundamentalism, because fundamentalism or biblicistic use of the Bible implies that everything we have in the Bible is completely singular and completely disconnected with anything else we find on the globe in human culture. And this is simply not true. The Bible is, to the contrary, the Bible is deeply rooted in these ancient cultures. And this is, you can connect with these ancient hymns and prayers. This is the one aspect. And the other one, I would say, the Bible also has is the result or the fruit of a long-standing development, where these basic ideas were also changed to a certain part, especially the idea of kingship. The idea of kingship is central in this ancient worldview, and we have seen this especially in Psalm 21. But you can also have several other psalms where the king clearly plays this role, like in the other ancient Near Eastern cultures. But on the other hand, we have a huge development in the Hebrew Bible, which you can call democratizing ideas of kingship. So, and even getting rid of kingship at all. So, for example, we have we just spoke about the Pentateuch, the Sinai pericope, and there we have no king at all, and we have a strong, one can really call it democratizing tendency. Of course, it's no modern democracy. This was unthinkable for the biblical authors, but it is a tendency of reducing and limiting human power. So therefore, I would say the Bible is also a strong statement against any modern authoritarianism and against any modern kind of kingship. So you just had no kings protests in the US, which have been seen quite well here in Europe. And I would say the Bible has this tendency as well. And therefore, these ancient texts were somehow reinterpreted very much. So that now, okay, we can use these texts in our religious self-understanding, but without the central figure of a human king. We can use them by ourselves. And I would say this is a very important aspect for dealing with the Bible in the modern situation.
Thank you so much. And last question there. How might these early Psalms inform our understandings of Israelite religion as distinct from or continuous with other ancient Near Eastern systems?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in part, I was already touching this question. As I said, I would first of all claim that the Bible is deeply rooted in the ancient Near Eastern cultures, and this can be demonstrated with these early Psalms, or in other words, these early Psalms inform, as you say, our view in a way that they show or demonstrate how close the Hebrew Bible is to traditions from ancient Ugarit, to the texts about the weather god of Aleppo, to hymns to the Mesopotamian storm god of Adad. This is a phenomenon which is, in my eyes, really foundational, and it counters any claims that the Bible is something absolutely disconnected with all other human culture. Just the opposite is true, I would say. The Bible is deeply connected with human culture in its plurality, in its multiformity in the ancient Near Eastern world. So, and you find so many parallels and similar ideas, similar notions already on the language level. So if you study ancient Hebrew language is closely related to the language of Ugarit, to the language of ancient so-called Canaan in the late Bronze Age. Already this shows how deeply the Bible is rooted in these cultures, and I think this is a very important aspect. And on the other hand, okay, you can say now, if we open our Bible, we have these fragments of these ancient hymns here and there embedded in the biblical text. So a colleague of mine called these fragments remnants of ancient Hebrew heathendom. So this is an allusion to a famous work by Julius Wellhausen, who reconstructed similar things about early Islam. where you can reconstruct similar phenomena. So, and this means if we now open the Bible, okay, we have these ancient remnants, but we have also many new ideas and new concepts, new theological concepts, like the divine election of the chosen people, like the ethics of the Hebrew Bible, which are also now connected with these ancient texts, but they point in a different direction. And so therefore we always have these both levels which we can learn from these ancient texts and hymns.
Muted myself. All right. Yes, I appreciate you coming on here. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. So people can check out your work in the description. Was there anything else that you wanted people to know about, whether that be your work or any other ideas that you read about in the paper, or just things that you want people to know about?
Yeah, I mean, I can show this book I recently published together with Christoph Lewin, Die Psalmen in ihrer Urgestalt. This is a book it's now only in German. It's along the lines of this article you were interviewing me about, reconstructing these early forms of psalms on a broader level. Actually, we both reconstruct about 40 psalms, which we think go back to the monarchic period and are related to this ancient image and concepts of the world, and it may broaden the entire view to a certain extent. This has been published last year in German, and we will prepare an English translation as well, I think, in the next year.
Awesome. Yeah. Something I've kind of had to force myself to do is use lots of Google Translate and AI to read some German, because I don't know it. But it's actually pretty easy. So yeah, people should definitely check that out if they can. But no, it's been a pleasure having you on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe for more content like this. If you found value and quality in this, check out Dr. Müller's other work. And otherwise, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.